I bring you greetings this morning from All Souls Waccamaw UU congregation in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, where I am now a member of the vocal minority. I'm grateful to have been invited back again this morning to speak at UUCF in this pulpit that you have delegated to Reverend Carl Clegg. I'm grateful for him, for his guidance to me, and also to you for that guidance that you have given me since I embarked on my UU journey in this room a bit over 10 years ago. The Reverend Robin Wall Kimmerer has written a short poem that encapsulates what I have to offer you this morning. She writes, "Even a wounded world is feeding us. Even a wounded world holds us and gives us moments of wonder and joy. I choose joy over despair. Not because I have my head in the sand, but because joy is what the earth gives me daily, and I must return that gift." Many of us are involved in actively resisting the authoritarian program that aims to dismantle democracy in these troubled times. We do that work out in our spheres of influence. Because there's too many fires for one person to put out, we all choose the work that each of us does best, and the work that we are best suited for in terms of our time and our talents and our abilities and our skills. And in some sense, we choose this work as a way of choosing joy over despair, even if the external context of that work is not one that gives us joy. We choose that work with joy as the ultimate goal. But there's also a private resistance in here that I want to emphasize this morning. And that private resistance is just as important as our resistance in the public square. That program of resistance is the solution to this question: how can we choose joy over despair by keeping centered in our own private worlds? In other words, how can keeping center in our own private worlds help us choose joy over despair effectively in the public sphere? How can we maintain spiritual sanity up here in our spheres of control as we support our chosen causes out there in our spheres of influence? Staying on track, staying spiritually centered, that is the inside job. The inside job is our sphere of control. That part of the serenity prayer we ask for help to change the things we can from here in. To be effective in whatever work I choose to participate in out there, to sustain that commitment over time, we have to maintain our spiritual center. Maintaining that center means we need to build personal practices of rest and renewal and self-awareness. And without them, we will burn out. Without those practices, we will fall into the trap of activism that's fueled by ego and anger, rather than activism that's rooted in love. Back in seminary school, by far the most transformative class that I took was an elective with the simple title, Self-Care. Anybody ever heard of self-care? It's a thing. Oh, touchy-feely you use. Some of us have actually heard about that, right? And it is definitely a thing. And it's just that. It's looking after yourself, self-care. Stephen Covey frames self-care as balancing your capacity for production against your production itself, giving your production really a broader foundation to sit on and the foundation is the production capacity. In that self-care course, I was taught that I can't stay spiritually centered by just working harder and harder and harder and harder. Maintaining spiritual balance comes by regularly resting, And it comes by regularly desisting from consumerism, among other things. Regular rest, desisting from consumerism. And I'd like to touch on a few personal examples with each of these now. For me, regular rest included during that course, and this has continued to this day, 9 years later, it includes a commitment to myself to get at least 7 hours of sleep a night, something that simple. Now I usually get 8 or 9. And I get more done than I was getting done before when I was getting 5 or 6, because I'm more efficient and more effective. Interestingly, since I started doing that in 2016, I've only had 3 or 4 colds. Before that, I was getting a cold once every month or two. All the time I would be sniffling and sniffling. And every one of those 3 or 4 colds that I've had since then started a few days after I broke that commitment to myself and pulled an all-nighter, or nearly so. It's also interesting that working fewer hours in order to rest coincided with one of the most productive and creative periods of my life. I can only suppose from all that Stephen Covey was right, and that greater production in fewer hours was enabled by a stronger production capacity. And in my case, desisting from consumerism, now that was much harder to implement, I'll be honest. As a latent effect of that class, though, Connie, my wife, and I have trimmed our carbon footprint back by just over 50% in the years that we choose not to fly, which is nearly all of them. If you want to cut your carbon footprint back, by the way, that's the number one thing you can do. Drive to Missouri, don't fly, right? We are also living by a budget for the first time in our adult lives. We have a conversation before we make purchases over a given amount. And for full transparency, we do still have an Amazon Prime account. They make it just too darn easy. But when we discuss a potential purchase, we think much more critically about what we're going to buy and whether we're going to buy local or as opposed from multinational corporations. Regular rest and desisting from consumerism, these are not just acts of self-care. They're acts of resistance in themselves. In his book, Sabbath is Resistance, Walter Brueggemann, who's one of my theological heroes, shows how our modern world demands from us. They demand endless productivity and endless consumption. Brueggemann shows that we are indoctrinated to measure our worth by what we produce and consume. Brueggemann argues that to take time for rest and renewal in the face of a world like that is itself a form of defiance, to step away from the urgency of the news cycle, to refuse to be caught in the cycle of outrage and exhaustion. That is to reclaim our own humanity and our own freedom. When we rest, we remember that we are more than the sum of our political actions. When we take time to reflect and be silent, when we do that, we reconnect with values that call us to justice work in the first place. When we gather in spiritual community on Sunday mornings like this, we remind each other that we are not alone in our struggles. Can I hear an amen to that? Amen. We are not alone. That is why, even in moments of deep urgency like this, we have to carve out space for spiritual renewal. That is why, even as we confront real and pressing injustice, we have to strategically and intentionally pause to nurture our spirits. I'm going to pause a moment. As Wayne Mueller writes in his book, Sabbath, Finding Rest, Renewal, and Delight in Our Busy Lives, every one of us here gets junk mail and sees junk ads as we scroll online, right? All that stuff has one purpose and one purpose only: to enslave our hearts and our pocketbooks. That's what it's for. Those ads, they are full, Mueller writes, they are full of, this is his picture, the ads are full of pictures of young, sophisticated people lounging about in their natural cotton clothes, loose and soft on their sculpted bodies. What they offer is the happiness of being young, at ease, and perfect. Order this blouse, the ads say. Order this cologne, this coffee maker, this chainsaw, this rocking chair, and you will enter this picture. Your troubles will disappear. They'll be gone. Buy what we have, and you will be happy. But beneath these words, we can hear the real message. You have never been happy, and unless you buy what we are selling, you will never be happy. The lie, the big lie, this big lie, there's another one. The lie is this: while they are promising happiness, what they are really selling is dissatisfaction. Our entire economy is predicated on dissatisfaction. It's designed to produce suffering. If we simply work harder and longer and more efficiently to get more stuff without stopping to appreciate what we have and what we are, then we are simply producing suffering more efficiently. Sabbath is a time to stop, to refrain from being seduced by our desires, to stop working, to stop making money, stop spending money. See what you have. Look around. Look around. Listen to your life. Do you really need more than this? Spend a day with your family, and instead of buying that new coffee maker, make coffee in the old one, and sit with your loved ones on the couch and hang out. Do what the models do in the picture without paying for it. Just stop. That is, after all, what they're selling in the picture, people who have stopped. You can't buy stopped. You simply have to stop. Or to put it in a nutshell, in the words of the Tao Te Ching, in pursuit of knowledge, every day something is acquired. In pursuit of wisdom, every day something is dropped. To practice Sabbath, as my experience has taught me that I need to do weekly, is not to abandon the world's struggles at all. To practice Sabbath is to actively resist, even during a break from emotionally charged interactive resistance in the public square. To practice Sabbath is to devote time at regular intervals to focus on our spiritual practice. To practice Sabbath is to renew our connection to the way things are, to whatever it is that keeps me taking the next step. To practice Sabbath is to avoid the temptation of self-righteousness, the illusion that we alone can solve all those problems that are in front of us. To practice Sabbath is to remember that our own inherent worth and dignity comes not from activism, but from something deeper, sacred, and unshakable. To practice Sabbath is to align our lives with the rhythms in which rest becomes sacred and gratitude blossoms without being forced. To practice Sabbath is to choose joy over despair, no matter what the external circumstances are. Our own Sabbath and our own joy are both within our circles of control. If there's just one thing you take from this message this morning, I hope it's this. We all need to take regular time off to resist the incessant demands of society, to rest and regenerate from public activism, from production, from consumption, and from the urgency of the news cycle, because the work of justice is long and it's sometimes discouraging. But if we cultivate a practice of rest and renewal, if we remain grounded in our values and connected to our communities, we will be resilient, and that will give us the strength to continue. So, as we move forward into another week, make an appointment with yourself to set aside time to rest. It may be a day, it may be a half day, or it may be 5-minute timeouts as regular intervals as you go through each day. Take time to reflect and nurture your spirits. And know in that time that the work of love and liberation is not yours alone to carry.